All right, so we're here with Kristen Waite Labat. She's a nurse, and she also happens to be my sister, which is an added benefit for me. So Chris has been a nurse for how many years?
30.
See, I would have gotten that wrong. And then, but she has also been in recovery for
16.
16 years. I think I would have gotten that one right. But I am afraid to say that I'm not even sure if you call it recovery these days.
Yes.
Oh, good. So I must say that I have a very personal stake in this story, and I kind of lived some of it alongside of her. So when she said that she would be willing to come to Marywood and talk about her time, I was really thankful and excited because I think that Chris's journey is a very spiritual one. There's a lot of facts and statistics behind substance use disorder. Did I get that right? There's a lot of facts and statistics, but it's really a matter of the heart. It's a matter of what happened to her and her story. So I would love to introduce you to Kristen Waite Labat. And is there anything else that you think we should add to that?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good. All right.
Thanks, Meg.
You're welcome. If you need anything, you just let me know.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. Waving to the folks in the back.
Yeah, I just realized there's folks in the back.
Yeah, they snuck up on you, Meg.
Oh.
Saw them coming. I'm just going to share my screen. I have some slides. I'll share and stop sharing periodically as we go along. But I like to, I just have to fix my screen so I can see all of you. I love it. You know, when I speak to colleges, sometimes they turn their cameras off. So I'm just kind of speaking into a void. So I prefer to have all your lovely faces. So thank you for keeping your cameras on. So my name, as Meg said, is Kristen Waite Labat. And I have been a nurse since May of 1991. So that's 30 years. Can you hear me okay, Meg? Okay. That's 30 years last month, which is really hard for me to believe. In fact, I'm not sure that I do believe it, but since it's 2021, I guess I have to. So I started out at Winona State University in Winona, Minnesota. Does anyone know Winona? Graduated in 1991. And after graduation, I went to work in Waukesha, Wisconsin. You guys know Waukesha? I know Davey does. And worked at Waukesha Memorial Hospital on the pediatric unit. When I graduated, I had no idea that I wanted to do pediatrics. I kind of fell into it because when I started college, there was a nursing shortage. So they were, everyone was being encouraged to go into nursing, although that's the only thing I ever wanted to do anyway. So I was going to do that. But by the time I graduated 6 years later, there were plenty of nurses and nobody was hiring new grads anymore. So it took me a while to find a job, and the job I happened to find was in pediatrics. And I kind of thought, I guess I'll take that until I can find something different or better. But I fell in love with it, loved pediatrics. So worked on the pediatric unit there at Waukesha Memorial for about 5 years. While I was working there, if our patients got really sick, the transport team from Children's Hospital would come and take that patient back to Children's for more specialized care. And I was always kind of bummed when they left because I really wanted to take care of those patients myself. So after about 5 years, I went to work at Children's, hoping, maybe someday I might be able to do something like that. I went to work as a critical care float nurse. I did the pediatric ICU and the neonatal ICU, recovery room, and the emergency room. Floated to all those different units. Just loved it. My favorite became the ER, emergency room, and trauma. I love taking care of trauma patients. So after about 3 years, I think it was, maybe it was 2.5, it's hard to remember now, of doing that job, I took a position in the emergency room. Like I said, that was my favorite. So took a job there. I think it was somewhere around 90, I don't know, early 90s. And wait, that's a lie, because that's when I graduated college. Early 2000s is when I went to the emergency room. 96 is when I went to children's. So maybe, I don't know, it's around the year 2000. It doesn't really matter at this point, does it? So long ago now. After about 3 years in the emergency room, I heard about an opening in the transport department on the transport team. And I thought, I'll give it a try. You know, I'd been working as a nurse about 10 years or so at that point, and had been at children's 4 years, 5 years, something along those lines. And so I applied for this transport nurse clinician job, and I got it. It was in 2001 that I started that job. I was so excited. I, first of all, did not think that I was qualified, but I thought they were kind of silly for hiring me. But I was really glad that they did, and fell into that role and just loved it. We went to other hospitals, accident scenes, to bring critically ill and injured kids back to children's. We took the helicopter, we took the ambulance, we took fixed wing aircraft, all those. It was just so much fun. Of course, my favorite was the helicopter. I know Meg is not a big helicopter fan, but it was my favorite. I loved that excitement. I loved the independence of it, because it was usually just the nurse and a respiratory therapist. Sometimes we took a doctor with us, but we preferred not to. It was just a whirlwind of a job, and I loved it. I did that job for 2 years and 7 months. Not that I was counting, but I was. But that's the job that I lost when I got caught stealing drugs from the hospital I was working for. They fired me, understandably. I lost my nursing license and ended up spending about 4 months in jail, which was very different from the beautiful walls of the hospital where I was working at. So I too, Meg, have a very personal stake in this issue. My goal in my life now is to raise awareness that this is a really big problem. It's happening all over the country. I'm certainly not the only nurse to have a substance use disorder and get in a lot of trouble because of it. So I'd really like to help prevent that from happening. Like, maybe they can get help before the whole world falls out from under them. So I share my story far and wide to whomever will listen, hoping that those who need it will hear it. So here we go. Things that I hope that you will take away by the end of my time with you tonight. I hope that you'll gain an understanding of the scope of the opioid epidemic that's plaguing this country and has been for a long time now. And substance use disorder in healthcare workers. It's not just nurses. Nurses, I know nurses. I am a nurse, so I speak mostly about nursing, but we're certainly not the only department that has that problem. Help you to identify risk factors in healthcare workers that may be under the influence, or that may make them a higher risk for developing substance use disorder, and then developing the ability to actually recognize someone when they're under the influence. Hopefully those are the things we'll talk about and you'll learn today. And if not, let me know at the end and I'll review them again with you. I like to start with current events, just to point out that it's a very current problem. It's not just something that happened to me 16 years ago. These 3 headlines are from last month. The first one is from the Drug Enforcement Administration. You may know them as the DEA. Nurse arrested for stealing over 1,400 vials of fentanyl. Again, last month on Channel 13, ABC WPKO, Arizona. Scottsville nurse arrested for multiple charges, including possession of fentanyl. And then again last month, NBC Channel 40 and WNKY, nurse arrested, accused of public intoxication and stealing fentanyl. I imagine you see the theme in these headlines, fentanyl, fentanyl, fentanyl. We'll talk more about fentanyl. I'd like to start with the difference between opiates and opioids, because there is a distinct difference, but those terms are kind of used interchangeably in the media. So I always like, although it may not matter much to the general public, I just like to let you know that there is a difference. So opiates are they're not synthetic, they're all natural. They come from opium. So opium comes from poppy seeds, which comes from poppy flowers. So when you eat poppy seeds, like in bagels or muffins or on buns or rolls, you're getting a little bit of opium. That's why you may not have this experience, but if you're going to be giving your drug screen, you want to stay away from poppy seeds beforehand, because it will give you, not will, but can give you a positive drug screen, because there's actually opium. That's where it comes from. So things like morphine, codeine, heroin, they're all natural, organic, if you will, substances. Those are opiates. And then there's opioids, which are either partially or fully synthetic or made in a lab. So things like Vicodin, Oxycontin, I imagine you've heard of Oxy, fentanyl, those are all opioids. And they tend to be stronger and more addictive than opiates, although we all know that heroin, which is an opiate, all natural, is very deadly also. So in the media, they use the term opioids, but when they use that term, they're referring to all of them. So they're not really distinguishing opioids being a synthetic or partially synthetic drug. They're using that to refer to heroin and all that as well. Just so you know, there's a difference. So let's talk a little bit statistics. Meg said I was going to talk about statistics. I don't want to let her down. If we look at drug overdose deaths, which is one way to kind of judge how bad the epidemic is, if we look at those statistics for the last 20 years, so 1999 to 2019, you can see the steady increase in the amount, the number of opioid overdose deaths. It's gone up every year except 2018. In 2018, the number actually went down for the first time, at least in the last 20 years. And it was really exciting. I remember when I pulled up those statistics for my slides, because I've been doing this presentation for a few years now, and I always update my slides every year. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. The numbers have gone down. And I thought, great, maybe they'll just keep going down, you know, and things will get better. Unfortunately, that didn't happen in 2019. The number went back up, not to the original number from 2017, which I think was close to 72,000. If memory serves me, but still, that's 70,000 people that died in 2019 from drug overdose deaths. And that's from all drugs, so not just opioids, but all drugs. And just to kind of give you an idea of how many people that is, if you know Waukesha, the population of Waukesha is about 72,000, or it was in 2015, 2016, but so that's like wiping out the whole city of Waukesha in 1 year's time. If you don't know Waukesha, it's just a lot of people. And it amazes me that, I mean, if you would think about something else, you know, killing that many people in a year. Now, I say that usually, but this last year we do have COVID, don't we? That has killed a ridiculous amount of people as well. So not comparing it to COVID, nothing, almost nothing, at least in my lifetime, compares to COVID, but 70,000 people is certainly not a small number. So 70,630 people lost their lives to drug overdose deaths in 2019. And this slide shows you the difference between the drugs and the overdose death numbers. So if you focus your attention on the orange line, on my slides it's orange, sometimes it's a different color in other, but the line that is the highest. That represents the synthetic opioids, or mostly fentanyl. You can see how it's starting in around 2015, that number took a sharp increase and has been on the rise ever since then. Synthetic opioids are addictive and deadly, and this shows you how that has changed over the years. In 1999, or 20 years ago, a little more than that, it was almost unheard of. And then in 2014, it started to increase, and now it is just skyrocketing. And then if we look at just opioids now, in the same 2019, so of those 70,630, we'll use 70,000 because I like easy math, especially when I'm trying to talk. So opioids accounted for almost 50,000 of those 70,000 deaths from opioids alone. And again, you can see how in 2018, the overdose death number went down just a tinch, went back up again to the all-time high in 2019. someone wants to come. I thought it was telling me my internet connection was bad. I was like, oh no, that's not good. Anyway, so about 50,000 deaths from opioids alone. And then if we look at fentanyl overdose deaths for that same time period, if you look on the bottom underneath the graph, because they don't make this chart anymore, so I have to figure out how I can mimic it. But in 2019, fentanyl overdose deaths were 34,500. We'll say 35,000 because that's a nice round number. So of the 70,000 deaths that year, 35,000 of them were from fentanyl. So about half were from fentanyl alone. Whereas in 2002, 1999, whatever year you want to consider, it was almost unheard of. And now it's half of all drug overdose deaths. So it's really been on the rise. And if we look at the pandemic, they say that drug overdose deaths, in their estimation, have increased about 30% since the pandemic began. 30%. So I didn't do the math, I should have, but 30% of 70,000 is a lot. That's a lot of people. I mean, the pandemic has been hard on everybody. I don't know a single person that it hasn't affected. But those with substance use disorder, are finding themselves isolated, maybe without a job now, maybe they've lost their job. They're overwhelmed, stressed, afraid, anxieties off the charts. And so they turn to what they know, and that's drug use. It certainly has also been difficult on healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, and certainly we're not the only healthcare workers, right? So, but all people, hospitals have been overwhelmed. Certainly that's getting better, but it's been a hard year on everybody. So some statistics from the CDC, or the Center for Disease Control. In the 12 months ending last May, so as the pandemic started unfolding, they realized that things were getting bad for overdose deaths. So they looked at the 12 months, May 2019 to May 2020. So really just the beginning months of the pandemic. But even in that short time, if they looked at that last year, there were 81 drug overdose deaths compared to the 70. So 70 for all of 2019. And then by May of 2020, if we looked at that previous year, it was up to 81,000. So 11,000 more in a year's time than the previous, if that makes any sense. U.S. jurisdictions that reported their synthetic opioid overdose deaths, 37 of the 38 reported increases in synthetic opioid overdose deaths. Again, synthetic being mainly fentanyl when they talk about synthetic opioids. 18 of those jurisdictions, yeah, I want to put an R in there for some reason, reported increases greater than 50%. So that, I mean, just that is incredible to me that there are twice as many overdose deaths in 18 jurisdictions. In 10 Western states, 10 of them reported a increase in 98% in their synthetic opioid-involved deaths. 98% more. Now, opioids aren't the only overdose deaths that have been affected. Cocaine overdose deaths were up by 26.5%, and methamphetamine 34.8, 35%. So it really has done a terrible number on substance use disorder in this country, the pandemic. Not just the pandemic, right? It has affected so many other things. If you want to see more about the CDC and what they're doing about it, and more statistics, you can go to that website. I'm happy to put that in the chat if you'd like me to. So I just want to talk a little bit more about fentanyl. Fentanyl is fully synthetic. There is nothing natural about it. It is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. I had attended a presentation once, maybe a year or two ago. Well, it was way before the pandemic, so maybe 2 years ago. Time goes really fast when you get. They had vials of powder that represented drugs. So they had morphine in a vial. It was full of the powder, small little vial. In the next vial was fentanyl, and it was just a little bit of powder at the bottom of the vial. And she held that up and she said, this is the same strength. Like this tiny little bit of fentanyl will get you the same effects as this full vial of morphine. Just to kind of show, put a visual on. I wish I had a slide of those. Maybe I should create one. I'll do that. Anyway, and then there's also other forms of fentanyl. You may have heard of it, carfentanil and sufentanil. They're even more stronger, like 1,000 times. So she showed a third vial with representation of sufentanil, and you couldn't even see the powder on the bottom because that's all it took, just like 1 or 2 granules of that drug to have the same effect of a full vial of morphine. So it's just a extremely strong medication, but it's also, and I say medication, we use the word medication, right, to mostly refer to pharmaceutical grade medications. Drugs, we typically refer to drugs of abuse, and we use the word drugs, but really it means the same thing. But the other thing about fentanyl is it's extremely addictive. One time, and that's really, if you have a propensity for addiction, you take it one time, and that is all it takes. Heroin, you've probably heard that. Daphne's raising her hand.
Go ahead.
What is fentanyl prescribed for generally?
Thank you, Daphne. Fentanyl, it's a pain medication. It's an opioid pain medication. So typically it's reserved for very serious pain, cancer pain, trauma pain, really strong pain. I'm going to stop sharing now and tell you a little bit more about my story because it ties into fentanyl. Are you having trouble with your internet connection?
Yeah, she's over at the house. When we have our calls, I'm usually over.
Yes. I'm sorry you're having trouble. Okay.
I'm having a little bit of trouble with your audio. You sound a little bit like there's more than one sound, or like it's duplicated just slightly. And I'm wondering if you held the microphone closer, or if you didn't.
I'll put some headphones in and maybe that'll help.
Yeah.
Let's try.
When you're
In the meantime, Marla, if you keep getting disconnected and you want to come over here, you're certainly welcome. We have it on the big TV.
On the big screen?
Yeah, big screen. You're on the big screen.
Does that sound any better, Kathy? Maybe?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so my substance use story really begins back in college. Before I went away to college, I was a pretty good kid. My sister might disagree with you, but I really didn't do much to get in trouble. I went to school, got decent grades. So when I went off to college, I was free for the first time in my life, and I was very excited, but also I'm not sure that I was prepared to be on my own. I remember I was 17 when I went. I turned 18 that October, and that was really the first time that I drank alcohol. I drank a couple of times before then, but nothing to any significant degree. But I remember in college, it was sometime around my birthday, we went out, and I remember just that feeling of, wow, that it just made me feel so much better. I didn't realize that I had suffered from anxiety and depression. I did, I think, most of my later adolescent years and my adulthood too, but drinking alcohol made me feel like I fit in. I wasn't so nervous. I was, always nervous. Didn't think people liked me. I thought it was stupid. I thought whatever. All the negative attributes I had a whole list for myself. But alcohol took all that away, and I could dance and I could hang out with my friends and have fun, and I just loved it. And so I drank. I drank often enough, and to a big enough degree that it took me 6 years to get my 4-year degree. And I had my first daughter while I was in college. I did not make very good choices when I was drinking. And thankfully I had my daughter, because it kind of made me clean up my act for a little while. And I was able to finish school. Not sure that I would have been able to do that had I not had her. So I graduated and went on to Waukesha Memorial Hospital on the pediatric unit. I didn't get that job until November, so there was a period of anxiety, waiting to get that job. But once I graduated and went to work, I really did okay for a while. I say hi, everybody. I had a
Marla. She came over.
Hey, Marla, I'm glad you're here. Hopefully now you won't fizz away. You'll stay right there. So I drank sometimes, but usually if I drank at home by myself when my daughter went to bed. But things were pretty stable. I started dating my first husband in '97, and he drank. And so we started drinking, and I started drinking a little bit more. And we'd go out and I drove when I was drinking. I mean, we did not behave as we should have. But I never got in any trouble for it per se. And then in 1997, I also had a minor surgical procedure on my abdomen and was prescribed Percocet. And I found that I really liked the Percocet, much like when I discovered alcohol, and I was like, oh, I really like that. It was the same with the Percocet. And what I liked about it is that I still had that feeling of being like just having my anxiety calmed, but I didn't act. I didn't act drunk. I didn't smell bad. I didn't stumble around or slur my words. As long as I didn't take too much, I could function relatively normally. So I remember after that surgical procedure, finishing my, the first prescription, even though the surgical pain I think was better, I didn't really need it for that. I found reasons to take it. And then I called in for the refill, even though I didn't need it for the pain. I called in for the refill. And they gave it to me without any question because I just had surgery. So why wouldn't I need pain medication? And then after that, I didn't really seek it out anymore, at least for a little while. But whenever I had back pain, I mean, I was a nurse, so I often had back pain. So I would completely exaggerate my symptoms and go to my doctor and get some Vicodin. And again, she would always give me some. I would limp into her office, and in my mind, I wasn't lying because I did have back pain, but I was really lying because it was way exaggerated. So that kind of went on for a little while, and then got married in '99, and my husband was a carpenter. Well, he's still a carpenter. And so they hurt themselves sometimes at work. So he would, on occasion, end up in the emergency room for, breaking a finger or whatever. And they would always give him opioids. And I remember one time they gave him Oxy, which is like one of the strongest prescription opioid pills, which, anyway, don't get me started on Oxy. But I remember he would share his pills with me because he was a very nice husband. He would share his pills with me. I would sneak his pills. I remember even one time calling in a prescription refill for him, even though he didn't know I did that and he didn't request it. He didn't know. And then I took all of those as well. So over that next, from '97 to maybe 2000 or so, I did that maybe a handful of times where I got some pills one way or another. But that was the extent of it. Sometime in the early 2000s, I was working in the emergency room. I was taking care of a patient, and I realized I just kind of said to myself, boy, we throw away a lot of really good drugs. And I started taking them. And it was IV. And the first thing that I took from the hospital was IV, because that's mostly what we used. I just put it in my pocket, and I took it when I got home. I don't remember what drug it was, but it was something like morphine. And I remember that same kind of feeling like, wow, that's amazing. That's what I've been looking for. That's what I needed. And I had convinced myself I wasn't doing anything wrong because I was taking garbage. I never, in the beginning, never stole from the stock. It was just the waste. We had small patients, and they would give us big vials of medication, and we would only need a little bit, so we would have a lot to waste. And so instead of wasting it, I would put it in my pocket and have my nurse friend co-sign to say she witnessed the waste because we were required to do that, although they hadn't witnessed the waste. So I stole drugs that way for probably a year or 2 years. I don't mark those dates like I do my sobriety dates. So I'm not exactly sure when that started or how long that went on in the emergency room. But when I went to the transport department then, I was so excited to have that job that I thought my worries are over. I'm never going to do that again. I had no qualms about it. I was never doing that again. I had to be responsible now. This was an important job. I had a second daughter now with my husband. So I knew I was done. I wasn't going to ever do that again. That lasted probably a week or two until I was again presented with waste, which I took. It went on like that. Every time I took something, I would tell myself, this is the last time I'm going to do this. I just need to do it this one last time because of this. I always had some excuse of why I needed it. Just this one time I'm going to take it, and then I'll never do it again. And so one time, this was maybe in the year 2003-ish, I was going through a divorce. My husband, the drinking didn't stop. He was not necessarily always that pleasant. It was not a good marriage. And so he left, and I was devastated. Not so much because the marriage was over, because actually it was a relief, but I felt like a failure. I knew my family was going to be upset. I was upset at myself because of the failure. And around that same time, one of my transports used fentanyl. We used fentanyl on transports for patients that were intubated or had the breathing tube in, because it was a potent narcotic. It stopped pain pretty much in its tracks, and it had a lot of sedative effects. So we would use that medication to keep those patients comfortable and quiet while we were transporting them. And so I had a baby, that my patient was a baby, and the fentanyl that we use would come in, I think it was 500 microgram ampules, so a big vial of it. And I only needed to use a tiny little bit of it. So I had like a whole syringe, 10 cc's, if you know what a cc is. A teaspoon is 5 cc's. So 2 teaspoons, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a lot, of fentanyl. And I took that home. And the first time that I used that, I immediately craved more. It was like a whole nother level of drug. I can't even explain that to you. I took it, and immediately I was just overwhelmed with this feeling that I needed more of it. And so I couldn't tell you how long it took me to take all of that syringe that I had. I don't have any memory of that. But after that time, I craved every time I walked into work. Like, I couldn't go into the hospital doors without having just this awful urge to go and take something. Before that, it was only, I know it sounds silly, but it was only when I was wasting something. So I always looked forward to it. But if I didn't have something on my shift, it was kind of like, oh, well, that's a bummer. But once I took that fentanyl, I could no longer not have something. So if I got some waste, that was great. If I didn't, then I started stealing it from stock, stealing the fentanyl from stock. And that's really where, I guess, my downfall, if you will, began with that actual stealing, because then they have a record of it. Because where there were 5 vials, now there are only 4. I would change drug records. I would break the vial and squirt saline in there to pretend like it was broken in transport. I played all kinds of games, but after a period of time, it didn't take them. Well, it took them probably about 9 months from what I can figure to figure out it was me. And so that night I was, I came into work, and I had been on vacation the week before, and that was kind of the test. If nothing was missing when I was gone, and then I came back, and that very first night that I was back, I took something, then they realized it was me. And I will tell you, that whole time I was on that vacation, I felt great. Now, granted, I was drinking, but I felt great. I was like, I'm never doing that again. Same as I did when I went to the transport team. I was like, I'm never doing that again. I'm done with that. I don't need that anymore. And I felt so great. And then the minute I'm walking in that door, I just cannot stop myself from taking it. And at that point, it was even I was taking it at work. Like I couldn't even wait till I got home. It was a devastating time in my life. I mean, I grew up Catholic. I liked going to church for the most part. I sang so loud, my mother shushed me. Meg still does that sometimes. No. But I considered myself I had a close relationship with God. I loved him and I wanted to do the right things. And I found myself in this horrible situation, completely incapable of not doing this awful thing. I knew it was bad. It's not like, I mean, in the beginning, I had myself convinced it was just garbage, so I wasn't doing anything wrong. But inside, I knew that I was. And certainly as my disease progressed and I began stealing, I knew it was wrong and I could not stop myself, which of course led to terrible shame and guilt. I felt rotten. It got to the point where I couldn't even like say my whole prayer. I prayed every night from the time I was, I don't know how old, I can remember. But it got so bad, like I couldn't even ask God to help me. Like I felt, I just didn't feel worthy anymore. Like I should just, like I'm not even good enough to ask God to bless my children. Like it was just soul draining. It was terrible. I mean, I guarantee you that anyone who is in that active addiction in their life doesn't feel good about it. There may be some people that do, but I think the majority of people feel bad. That shame and that guilt keeps you sick because, you know, I was too stubborn and hard-headed to ask anyone for help or to say, you know, Meg, who was she and I lived together. We shared a duplex together. She watched my kids. She was so supportive of me. I couldn't even go to her, who really was my best friend, to say, I need help. Will you help me? Because she would have helped me in a second. I know she would have. So would my parents have. But I just could not bring myself to say, I'm doing this and I need help. Because I had no idea what would happen if I did that, like what would happen to me. I didn't know. I was too scared to think about it. So I would either drink or use more drugs to kind of cover up that shame and the guilt and the worry and the fear. It's a terrible cycle and it doesn't have to be that way. So I'm going to pause there and I'm going to go on, let me share my screen again and talk about, can you see my screen? Can you see my screen? The drug diversion healthcare works? Okay. So what is drug diversion? So when we talk about diversion, it's moving a controlled substance or a narcotic, if you're of the old, we used to use the word narcotic, transferring a narcotic or a controlled substance from a legal source to an illegal one. So every time I shared my husband's prescription, that's illegal, that's drug diversion. Certainly when I called in his refill for him and then took it myself. When I was taking the waste, not years, but that's another part of the story. I'll get into that later. But certainly when I was stealing, that was diversion. So anytime you're moving substances where they don't belong, that's diversion. In 2019, from publicly reported drug diversion incidents, 77% of them were either doctors or nurses, 35% of them being nurses. And those are of public reported incidents. So there are plenty of incidents that are not reported. I mean, if you think about the years that I diverted, so from probably around 2000, 2001 until 2004 when I got caught, 3 years, how many times did I divert? I don't know. But the only ones that get recorded are the ones they caught me doing. So there are plenty more diversion incidents than we know about. But other groups in the hospital or other healthcare groups, pharmacy and pharmacy techs are obviously in that, commonly divert as well. They have access just as much, if not more, than nurses and doctors. Paramedics are the guys in the ambulance who use the medications too for patients. And then there's other, and who are other? Well, interesting is the right word, but one couple of groups that are not as well known for diversion are like housekeeping and maintenance workers. What happens there is they are responsible for emptying those sharps bins, the bins where we put all the used needles. And so they will go in there and take, partially used syringes and get their drugs that way. And there have been many instances of finding them in a bathroom overdosed, as there are with nurses and doctors, and finding them in a bad position in the bathroom because they've used the drugs that they got out of the sharps bins. So anywhere that narcotics are available or accessed puts people at risk, puts whoever has access to them at risk. So we have a lot of work to do to make things safer. They say, and when I say they, it's American Nurses Association, the American Medical Association, AMA. 10 to 15% of healthcare workers have some form of substance use disorder. So 10%, if we look at like a busy emergency room, there are probably 20 to 30 healthcare professionals working on any given shift. And that means 2 or 3 of them, did I say 20 to 30, 10%? See, I like easy math, so we'll use 10%. That means 2 or 3 of the people that are running around have some form of substance use disorder. And that doesn't mean they're all working impaired or working while using. In fact, most of them probably aren't. The American Nurses Association says 6 to 8% of healthcare workers, nurses is really what they're talking about, are working impaired. So even if that's 6%, that's still a large number of people that are working under the influence in every healthcare facility around the country. Prescription drug abuse, so not necessarily cocaine and methamphetamine, but opioids in particular, are 5 times higher among healthcare professionals, really because they have easier access to those drugs. I mean, they work with them, they, every day. About 90% of diversion incidents involve opioids, which speaks to their addictive nature, because we also have access to amphetamines like Adderall and Ritalin, those kind of things. We have access to anti-anxiety meds like Xanax, Valium, Ativan. And while I diverted those, if that's what I had as waste, not stimulants, because we can use those in the emergency room, but it wasn't what I really want. What I preferred were opioids. And then they estimate that there are about 37,000 cases of drug diversion a year, but I suggest it's much higher than that. The reason I said a little while ago, because nobody's counting those incidents that they don't know about. How could they? And then about a third of all disciplinary actions taken against nurses, and that's by a nursing board, are drug or alcohol related. So when the nursing board gets involved, about a third of those cases are drug or alcohol. So why does this happen? Or what puts healthcare workers at greater risk than the average person? So relief from stress. So stress we know is a risk factor for using substances, whether it's alcohol, drugs, or other things. There's plenty of other addictive substances. Stress, I mean, if you didn't know, nursing is a stressful job. So are a lot of other jobs. Doctors, of course, have stressful jobs, but so does half the country, or maybe 3/4. I don't know. Most jobs are stressful. But we mix that with having easy access to opioids, and it's a very dangerous combination. So self-medication for things like anxiety and depression. I had anxiety and depression. I sure didn't know what that was when I was a teenager and even through college. But later on, when I did know that was my problem, or that I had that tendency, sometimes I went to a therapist and I took medication to treat it and would feel better for a while. But then I'd be like, I'm better, I don't need that anymore. And then I would stop all that stuff and start feeling crummy again. And then I would use alcohol or drugs to make myself feel better. It's very silly. So even when I knew that what the problem was, I didn't want to take the correct steps to treat it. I wanted the easy way out, or the feel good way out, or whatever the reason for that is. So can follow surgery, injury, or an emotional loss. Certainly my drug use started after surgery when I was introduced to it and realized how good that could make me feel. And emotional loss, I know that when my use changed, or when I started first using the waste drugs at the emergency room, and when I transitioned and used fentanyl, which is really pharmaceutical grade heroin anyway. But I was going through different crises in my life. So when my divorce, that was a big trigger for me, and me having that access to that fentanyl just at that moment, it was just like asking for trouble. I don't know. It just was a bad combination, bad time for that. We have easy access. So things are better now than they were when I was diverting, but they're still not great because it's still happening all over the place. Denial and enabling. The only way I could, even allow myself to use was by denying that it was a problem. Oh, it's no big deal. So it was either, the first thing was it was no big deal. I was not stealing because it was garbage. And then after that, it was, this will be the last time. I know this is bad, but I'm just going to do it now, just this one time, because, my husband and I had a fight, or because this, that, or the other. I don't remember now what my excuses were, but I had to convince myself that it would be the last time. I was just going to do it one more time. And enabling. My coworkers, my peers, enabled me to continue, not because they were complicit in it. They had no idea I was using, but because they didn't know what signs to look for. They didn't know what the changes they were seeing in me. They didn't know that was indicative of substance use. They enabled me to go on. They co-signed my narcotic waste, without ever seeing it, which enabled me to steal it. So I'm not blaming them, not one little bit, but if they had those tools, if they had known, they may have been able to intercede earlier. Maybe seeing what happened to me, because after I got fired, they were all told what happened, which at the time upset me. But now when I look back on it, that was a really good learning, I'm missing the word, but anyway, it was very good for them to learn what to look for. And then genetics. Certainly there's a lot of addiction on my dad's side, not my dad, but on my dad's side of the family, there's some addiction. So is it possible that that contributed to it as well? Maybe. Again, I'm not trying to blame my poor choices on genetics, but I think I had a predisposition for, finding more relief than maybe other people might from using substances. So how do we divert? How do they? If I say they, then it's not me, right? How do they? So how do we divert? Well, and I don't want to give away all the secrets, right? I don't want to give anybody ideas. Although, are there any nurses in the audience? Is it just me? I know some of you guys are nurses.
Big no in this group.
Okay.
And Kathy, I know she's a nurse either. Nope, she's not a nurse.
Okay. I won't be giving anyone any ideas then. Well, I kind of worry when I talk to nursing students because I don't want to give them any ideas, but really these are all out there anyway. But anyway, how am I doing on time? Oh boy, it's already 7:30. How did that happen? All right, I'm talking faster. Administering a partial dose or a no dose to a patient. So if they're getting ready to give medication to a patient, they may take half of it. They may then water down the dose the patient gets. I have to be honest and say that I did that one time, and it was a trauma patient. And the only way in my mind I could justify doing such a thing, because that's a terrible thing, was to say to myself, well, he's a trauma patient, so he'll get as much as he wants, medication as he wants. So if whatever I give him now doesn't cover his pain, they'll just give him more. So in my mind, even though really what was happening is he was going to be in pain longer because I, number one, took longer to give it to him because I was taking half of it, putting it in a syringe for myself. And number two, he wouldn't get the right dose. So he would be in pain longer. Really have to be a really good liar to yourself to make it okay to do something like because as I know myself now, I would never do that. Like I would never, you know, cause any person, but certainly not one of my patients, to be in pain or discomfort longer than necessary, just so that I could, just so that I could be whatever. So it's a very, very slippery slope, and the work, you know, the more bad things you do, the more reasons you come up with why it's not so bad. It's really, it's interesting to me how I could say that kind of stuff to myself and believe it, even though I know that it's not true. That denial is so strong. I've talked already about co-signing a narcotics record, but that's for the waste. So they co-signed that I wasted it when they didn't see me. Obtaining PRN, which means as needed medications for patients who haven't requested them. So, hey, do you need your surgical Vicodin, you know, your post-op medication? No? Okay, oh good, then I'll take it. Steal medications, I told you about that. Alter drug records. So when I stole this medication, I had to make it look like it was used. So I would change the drug records to make it match the number that was in there. Some folks, although I didn't do this, some folks will ask, I say doctors on here, but really it's prescribers, because doctors aren't the only prescribers these days. But ask other prescribers to write prescriptions for them. So, you know, nurse working with a doctor may say, oh my gosh, I have this terrible toothache and I can't get to the dentist till Monday. Can you write me just for 5 Vicodin? Can you write me a prescription? And then change it, the 5 to 50, to get a heck of a lot more than intended. Steal prescriptions or forge prescriptions. I'm sure that you've all seen prescription pads and prescription, you know, the doctor writes a prescription. They don't do that a whole lot anymore. Most of it's done electronically, which is really smart, and it's much safer. So that doesn't happen as much. Call prescriptions into a pharmacy. So after I got in trouble at the hospital and got fired, I was charged with 26 felonies, 1 for each vial of medication they could prove I stole. And I was arrested. And that happened in July of 2004. By October of that year, I ended up with 1 misdemeanor and some probation. And I really felt relieved. I was so grateful that I wasn't going to jail. And I started work as a medical secretary in a doctor's office. One of the first days that I was there, the doctor handed me a prescription and said, can you call this in for this patient? And I looked at it and it was for Vicodin. And I remember like starting to sweat. Like I called in the pharmacy, or I called up the pharmacy and gave them the information. And they said, oh, yep, thank you. And I hung up the phone, and I just had this, I don't know, really weird feeling. I thought, boy, that was really easy. And I got up and I went into a side office and I called in a prescription for myself, the same way I just called in for that patient. So this doctor, who was super nice to give me this job, because, you know, I pleaded with him, but I said to him, you know, I just need someone to give me a chance. You know, all of this stuff happened, but now I'm doing better. And, you know, then I don't know if I told him I was in recovery or not, but I certainly wasn't. I was drinking during that time. I just could not seem to, couldn't seem to quit all substances. And I did that, called in prescriptions for myself periodically over the next few months, 9 times, I believe, in January of 2005 then. I called in a prescription. And again, when I called in the prescription, it was the last time. I was never going to do that again. And every time I called in a prescription, even knowing in my head, of course, I'm going to probably do this again. So I called in this prescription for the last time, and told the doctor I wasn't feeling well. I was going to go home early. So he said, oh, okay. He was so nice. And I went to the pharmacy to pick it up, and unbeknownst to me, they had called back to the office to ask me about the prescription, because I had just called one in 3 days prior. And the doctor said, well, I've never called in a prescription for her. And so they called the police, and the police, when I showed up, pulled up and arrested me. And I was charged with 9 felonies that time, and one of them stuck, so I'm a felon today. And I didn't leave jail for 4 months at that point. So I was in jail from January 18th of 2005 till May 13th which was the longest 4 months of my life, but was what I really needed so that I could be sober, because I did not like being there, not one little bit. And I never want to go back there again. So I decided, I guess I need to do whatever it is I need to do to be sober. And so when they finally let me out, because it felt like I was going to be there forever, I pretty much threw myself into recovery. And Meg, my sister, and my ex-husband had watched my kids, taken care of the house, all the bills, all that stuff for 4 months for me. So when I got out, I have no job, really not too much responsibility with the kids. My older daughter was 14 at the time. My younger daughter was 4. She actually turned 5 while I was in jail. So I really was able to focus on my recovery. So I did that. I went to meetings, I think almost every day except Sundays, to church. And really kind of threw myself into recovery. And I don't know why I got onto this story, other than I feel like I've run out of time now. And I was going to tell you it, but a little later. But anyway, so I've been in recovery since then, but it hasn't always been an easy road. I have never used drugs or alcohol since that time. So I'm very grateful for jail for that reason. If for nothing else, it gave me the time I needed away from substances to let my brain fog clear so that I could see what I needed to do. And so just trying to think if I should cut some of this out. I'm going to come back to that story. I just want to quick go over signs of substance use. So usually when I give this presentation to nursing students or nurses, I have a couple of slides of things that they can look for in their coworkers that might indicate a substance use disorder, or that they're using substances while working. But for this presentation, I thought, well, what would somebody who was a patient see, or maybe the patient's loved one? So if you're a patient or a loved one of a patient, maybe you're visiting them at the hospital once we're able to do that again. So if you have a healthcare worker, and again, most often you would interact with nurses because patients most often see nurses, but it could be doctors, it could be housekeeping, it could be anybody at the hospital. But shakiness is a indicator. So I shake all the time. I have benign essential tremors. So it doesn't mean that every nurse that is a little shaky is using substances. But sometimes, I mean, at the end, it was so bad that I had to steady my hands on the bed in order to work with a patient or work with an IV or an IV tubing. I was shaking so badly. So it's not just subtle shaking, but really pretty pronounced shaking. Wearing long sleeves when inappropriate. So when it's hot, I wore long sleeves all the time because I had needle marks on my arms. It's hot and humid, and your nurse or your physician is shaking and wearing long sleeves and looks really unkempt. Irritability, agitation, not taking care of themselves, maybe dirty hair, or, I mean, it doesn't have to be that dramatic, but sometimes even those subtle signs. Falling asleep or nodding off. I don't know if you have experience with that opioid nod where they just can't keep their eyes open and they're nodding off as they're talking to you. If you see that, that's a really good indication. And then a patient's ineffective pain management. So if you have a patient, or if you are a patient or a loved one, and you're taking medication and it's not doing anything for your pain, maybe ask to speak with a manager or talk to the doctor about it, because it's possible that you're getting Tylenol instead of Vicodin, or getting a smaller dose. They're splitting the dose with you, something along those lines. But if you see those things and you're worried, ask to speak with the manager for that unit. Talk to your doctor about it, unless it's the doctor that you're concerned about. Then you can talk to the nurse about it. But talk to somebody about it, because so often people see things and aren't real sure what to do about it, or aren't real sure that what they're seeing is an issue. So I always say, trust your gut. And if something doesn't seem right or feel right, say something to somebody about it. And if you're not comfortable doing that, or you're not sure, then maybe ask someone that you trust a friend or a relative to come and help you. Maybe ask them to help you talk to somebody, or ask them to come see what you're seeing, or look at what you're seeing and let you know if you're really seeing signs, or if you're just think you're seeing signs. So just want to talk briefly about, just to put some of this in perspective. So in Wisconsin, we have about 87,000 nurses. That means that about 8,700 of them, if we use that 10% statistic from a little while ago, 8,700 of them suffer from some form of substance use disorder. And in 2017, which is the last Board of Nursing report, they haven't put out a report in 3 years. In 2017, there were 365 nurse professionals, so that includes RNs, LPNs, advanced practice nurses, all licensed nurses, were being monitored by the nursing board for some kind of substance use disorder. There were 32 nurse professionals enrolled in the PAP, which I'll talk about. I'll explain what that is in a minute. So that means that there were about 400, again, I like easy math, about 400 nurse professionals that are being monitored for some kind of substance use disorder in the state of Wisconsin in the year 2017. So if there are 8,700 nurses that are working with a substance use disorder, but only 400 of them are being monitored, that means there are about 8,300 that are still practicing. And again, that doesn't mean they're all working impaired, but a fair percentage of them are. And that's 8,300 people who could use help, who could use our help, who maybe if they heard something, they might say, oh my gosh, that sounds just like me. I better talk to somebody. Which is why I would like to share this presentation with as many people as will listen to it. So the professional assistance procedure, I just want to talk briefly. I keep saying I want to talk briefly. I really thought I cut out a lot of this so that I would. Anyway, there is a procedure that nurses can join before they lose everything, before like the world falls out and they get arrested and they go to jail. There's a program called the Professional Assistance Procedure at the nursing board, run by the nursing board, that a nurse can join, say, hey, I have a substance use disorder, I need help, and they will guide them kind of through treatment. They don't do the treatment themselves, but they will watch them and monitor them through it. They won't lose their nursing license. They may have it suspended for a little while till they can get, in the program and start doing what they need to do, but it'll monitor them through their treatment and ensures immediate action. So if they don't do their drug screens or they stop going to therapy or whatever, they can immediately notify the employer and pull their license. It doesn't exempt them from discipline. So if they have legal trouble, like I did, they can't join the confidential program, but there's a program that is exactly the same, it's just public record. So when you have legal problems like I did, the nursing board has to show that they've done something to address it so that you're not out there practicing with a substance use, an untreated, disorder. So if you look at my nursing license, and you can, if you're interested to, you could just go to the nursing board website and put my name in it. You can look at all the different orders that I went through as I went through the program. It's a 5-year program. Other states have 2-year programs, 3-year programs. All states are different, but in Wisconsin, and it's a good thing it is, because I think 5 years is what it takes. It's a 5-year program of random urine drug screens, required 12-step meetings, whether AA or NA. Treatment-based assessment, so you have to go to a therapist and they will talk to you and get your whole history, and then they will tell you what treatment you need. Do you need residential treatment? Do you need intensive outpatient treatment? Do you just need one-on-one? And you have to do whatever they recommend. And then you have to submit reports every quarter, so every 3 months. The person in the program, their supervisor at work, and their therapist all have to submit reports, and then you have to pay for all that, which can be very tricky, as in my case, because I didn't have a very good job when I started. I didn't get the courage to even attempt to get my license back till 2007. And that's a whole nother story that I won't get into. But in 2007, I joined this program and got my restricted nursing license back, which was a huge thing because I thought it was gone forever. And then I have had a lot of restrictions on my license. Obviously, no access to controlled substances, which seems rather wise. Can't work for a staffing agency or home health care because it's not supervised. It's too, you can get in too much trouble doing that. You need to have someone with your license or higher monitoring you 100% of the time. So you can't like work night shift. There's all kinds of things that you can't do. So as long as you follow all the rules, get your drug screens, go to therapy, go to meetings, stay clean and sober, submit your reports and do all of that for 5 years, you're good to go. So after 5 years, then I applied to have my full licensure reinstated, and they approved that. So actually that happened in 2010. I've had my full nursing license back since that time. Although you can see everything that I went through. If you join the program before, like I said, before your whole world drops out from under you, none of that shows up on your nursing license. It's all confidential. The nursing board, of course, has that in their archives or whatever, wherever they put that. But it's not available for public record. So if of those 32 nurses that I talked about before being in that PAP program, that's all confidential and nobody in the public would know that they were being monitored, which is really helpful when you're going to look for a job. Because when I go to look for a job, they see all this stuff and they're like, I don't think we want to hire her. And I can't say that I blame them. So at least when you're in the confidential program, you can at least get into an interview, and then you still have to disclose all of it, but at least you can get before them, look them in the eye and tell them your story and what happened and what you're doing and all that. It's harder to get in front of them with all that other stuff on your license. Very briefly, I'm just going to talk about preventing drug diversion. This is the last thing I'll talk about because I think it's really important. So it's really, how do we prevent all this from happening in the first place? Wouldn't that be a great idea? Like if we could identify nurses that were at higher risk, offer them some, maybe counseling periodically, and then make it harder for them to divert meds in the first place, ways we could do that. So random urine drug screens for those with access. I know once I started doing drug screens to have my nursing license back, I was not tempted. I have to say, have not been tempted since jail to divert anything. It's never wanted a drink. Jail cured me of that, thankfully. But I felt when I was doing the urine drug screens, I knew I couldn't. I knew that if I wanted to keep my nursing license, I had to do these drug screens. There was no chance of me getting away with anything. So I think it's a really good idea, although it's not a popular one, to have those that have access to controlled meds have to do random urine drug screens at work. They don't want to do that. People that don't have a substance use disorder probably don't think that's fair. But pilots have to give random urine drug screens. Other people with jobs that could affect a lot of people have to do them. I think nurses and doctors and pharmacists and those that handle those meds should also. Put cameras in the medication rooms where people are handling controlled meds and review the video. So most rooms and like automated dispensing machines have cameras, but they don't always look at the footage, which I know because at the place where I work now, I work at a behavioral health hospital. One of the nurses was going in behind people who didn't log out of the machine and taking meds out of the machine under their name. And they didn't catch her for a couple of years. And when they went back to look at the video, realized she had been doing it for a long time. Never co-sign as a witness. I say if you haven't witnessed it, but obviously each other. I drill that into the nursing students' heads. Don't ever co-sign for somebody if you haven't seen the waste of the medication. Single dose syringes only. Instead of giving a big old vial of a medication, just give me what I need for that patient. And then lock IV pumps that have controlled meds. So have you heard of PCA pumps or patient-controlled analgesia pumps? Being in recovery, one of our friends was dying of cancer, and we went to visit her in hospice care. And she had a bag of fentanyl hanging, just a regular bag on an IV pool. And all these, it's kind of funny if it wasn't so scary, all these recovering drug addicts came in to visit her, and there's this big old bag of fentanyl hanging there. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what is, that needs to be locked in a locked machine where only like needs 2 people to unlock the machine to change the dose and change the bag, whatever. I just think it's so dangerous to have that hanging up like that. And not just for visitors, but for the workers too. Secure all sharps and pharmaceutical waste bins and have witness when those are changed as well, so that housekeepers and maintenance people are safe. And then develop a program where drug diversion incidents are reviewed at the facility, every one of them, to see where we could make things safer, where it could be better. And then have like a 24-hour confidential reporting line, because it's really hard to turn in a friend or coworker that you think may be diverting. And having a confidential way to report that would be helpful in those situations. There's some resources. I'm not going to go over them too much, but AA and NA are particularly useful for people who lose their job and their insurance because they're free. The other thing I would say is if you know of somebody who's going through it doesn't have to be a nurse or a doctor, but someone who's going through a crisis needs help to find treatment programs and that. Even if you have insurance, it can be really difficult to find what's covered. How do you navigate all of that? Can be very overwhelming. So even offering to help with that, call an insurance company for them and help them weed through all of that would be really helpful. Other people to look towards are family members, people in recovery. So you can call, as you said earlier, Kathy, you can call a NA or an AA support line and say, hey, my daughter, my sister, my whatever, my friend is having this issue. What do I do? And they can help you find the resources that you need, even just a person to talk to. I'm going to put a Google form, or maybe I'll just email it to you, Megan. You can email it to everybody, but I could put it in the chat too. I really would appreciate feedback on the presentation. I realize it went way too long, but feedback on what you thought, if you thought it could be shorter or longer or include more information on this or less, whatever. I would value your feedback. It takes less than a minute if you just want to click a number on a scale, or you can provide more feedback. I would really appreciate that. I did write a book about my story, which you probably all know already. It's called An Unlikely Addict. You can get it on Amazon. I also have a website, unlikelyaddict.com, and I write a blog periodically. I haven't done that in a while. I probably should. Blog.unlikelyaddict.com. And my contact information is there, email address, phone number. If you have any questions, you want to talk, you ever have a situation you don't know what to do, please feel free to call or email me. You can ask Meg to contact me too. I would be happy to talk to anybody, anytime. If there's anything that I can do to help you, I would be most happy to do that, because that's where I get most of my joy these days, is helping others, even a little bit. So I thank you for listening to me. Sorry I went on too long, but I appreciate your time and your attention. That's all I have to say. I will hang out as long as you would like me to. If you have questions, feedback, any discussion. Thank you.
You didn't go on too long as people only have 8 minutes or less of questions.
Right.
And you did it perfect.
I knew that in advance. So I talked to Jane Davey before we came. I said, how much time am I going to have for questions? And I would like to say that my spiritual relationship with God is right back to where it was and even better. And I feel like he was with me through every second of that journey. And our relationship today, it's different. It's certainly not the same as I was struggling. So, but I know that God is there for me. And growing up, I almost had like this picture of this God who was angry at me. And certainly when I was going through all these troubles, God was very angry at me. And now I just picture him as this gentle father who loves me and wants me to be happy and healthy and well. And, so that's who I picture now. And that's, you know, when I speak at, I haven't since COVID because we got kicked out, well, kicked out, but when I go into jails and speak with women and men there, I always share that idea of God. And that's what I love about 12-step programs is that you can bring your own concept of God. You don't have to, they don't give you they don't say you have to believe this. They say, you know, let's help you find the God that you can, that can help you, that can, you know, make your life more meaningful. And I love that about AA for me is that I've seen so many people come to faith through that program because, you know, a lot of people grew up, certainly a lot who are in, or who have substance use disorders, grew up in very traumatic, trauma-filled lives and maybe didn't feel like God was there for them. I didn't feel that. I felt like kind of the opposite, like I wasn't there for God, but people haven't, that whole idea has been healed in these programs because, you know, they're not told they have to believe anything. They say, let us help you find what that means for you. And I just think that's a beautiful thing and have loved watching that transformation in so many people. So,
Can you talk about Suboxone? I have a loved one who was addicted to opioids. Now I'm concerned he's addicted to Suboxone, but I understand it's something that he'll be on for a long time.
yes. So Suboxone is a medication-assisted treatment. And it's a film that you put under your tongue. It's an opioid, but it's a partial, I won't get into too much in a second, but it's, what it does is calms cravings. So it binds to opioid receptors in the brain so that you think you're getting an opioid, but it doesn't have the stimulating or the opioid effects, so they don't get high off of it. So it helps stem withdrawal without making them high. It's very useful. Some people are on it for just a few weeks to wean off of opioids. Some people are on it for a lifetime. It doesn't make them high, so are they dependent on it? Sure. If they stop it like that, they'll go through withdrawal. So are they dependent on it? Sure. Are they getting a high from it, nodding off and unable to function? No. So everybody is different. And I think for me, I highly encourage MAT, it's called medication assisted treatment, for those that need it. Mm-hmm. It is also abused sometimes, so it's not a perfect, just like methadone. It's not perfect, but it does help a lot of people. Anyone else have any questions? You can ask me anything.
The question keeps popping into my mind. You were following the story sequentially until you got out of jail. And then you sort of touched on briefly about how you didn't have a license and you went into an assisted re-entry into your profession or something like that, where you were supervised, and then after some time now you're a normally accredited, but you still have this history. I kind of got a little bit lost in the, my mind, the sequence of the story ends when you got out of jail, but you never used again. And then I picked up a few little assisted things that happened, but I'm just wondering, like, were you unemployed for a long time, or like, I don't know, I just feel a little bit patchy on the history.
Sure. Yeah, so when I got out of jail, I was unemployed for a period of time. In July of that, so I got out in May of 2005. In July of that year, I took a job at a factory because I could find no other job. I worked in, remember, make the engine dipsticks I had to make 3,000 in 8 hours. It was just pinning on. It was a really hard job. I mean, it was in a factory on the north side of Milwaukee. And I had to take the bus to get up there. It was really hard. But I went and I did the best job that I could, and I did it with a smile most nights because I was so grateful for that job because I was really getting desperate. And then I did that job for about 3 months, and I got a job in a doctor's office, which was a little concerning to everybody, considering what happened the last time I went to work in a doctor's office. But this doctor was in the program himself. And so he was very careful about, like, I didn't have access to any of his prescription information. I didn't call in prescriptions for patients. So it was a very safe place actually for me to be. And I worked there for about 2 years. While I was there, I was going to counseling, and my therapist is the one who said, well, what do you think about trying to get your nursing license back? And I was like, they're not going to give me my license back. I have this felony now. You know, they're not going to do that. And she said, well, she was awesome. She's passed away now, but she was awesome. And she's like, how do you know? Did you talk to them? Do you know? Like, she always challenged me. It was kind of sassy. And so I called the nursing board, and I, you know, explained my situation, and they said, yeah, if you do this, that, and the other thing, and they sent me a whole packet of information. You know, if you do all of this, we'll review it, and if all is in order, then we'll give you a stay of your suspended license, so they'll stay the suspension for 3-month blocks. And then every 3 months, I would have to submit all of my paperwork. They would review it again and decide if I could keep continuing on with my license. So I did that initial application in 2007, and I got my, you know, restricted license back, and I joined that program. So that was that program I was talking about. I hear the helicopter Fly for Life is going over. It always interests me how often that goes over when I'm giving these talks. That was the helicopter we used for our transport. And it's very distinctive, but like a news helicopter versus, it's got 2 jet engines on it. Sounds like anyway. It's a good reminder. But now I got distracted. So anyway, so I joined that program in 2007, and in 2010 was when I completed the program, because it's a 5-year program. And for the life of me now, I initially lost my license in 2004, which is when when the charges were done. I don't know when they considered my start date, but it's a 5-year program. It was done in 2010. So I've had my full licensure back since that time. And after working in the doctor's office, once I got my nursing license back, he couldn't afford a nurse. So I went to work in a dialysis clinic for a while. And then I worked in I've been in went to work in research for a while. And then now I've been in behavioral health the last 4 years. And I also work as a nurse coach. So I work with nurses who are new to recovery and are just getting started in this whole craziness. So I kind of coach them through that whole process, which is very rewarding. There's other things too, but I could go on all night. Wouldn't bore you with that. But. Does that help, Kathy?
Yeah, I'm happy to hear you explain how you crawled your way back up, and how you went from one completely different career to a completely different career now, you know, and the arc of how that happened. And I just want to throw in one other thought that keeps popping into my mind, and that is that I think that God gave you this test or this journey into darkness so that you can reach down and help others or prevent others. So you're on a mission, in my mind, you're on a sacred mission doing this work. And I appreciate that you're doing it.
Thank you. I feel the same way. I mean, I guess I feel like if sharing my story can help somebody, may as well make some good come out of something that was that was very difficult. Maybe it'll help someone else.
I think you went through it so that you could so that you could teach. That's why the purpose of all of this was so that you could help other people. In my mind, because I didn't have to go through it.
Good thing. I'm glad you didn't.
Just knowing Kristen personally, I can tell you, she is the most dedicated person I've ever seen doing what she's doing. I mean, all she really had to do is go to meetings, right, and stay clean. So, but are doing so much, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful to watch. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Meg, can you say a few words? I mean, from the sister's perspective? I mean, I know you're just you seemed just supportive, but I'm just wondering if you could say a few words from the sister side on this.
I was completely supportive and never had any doubts or anger or frustration. No, that wasn't. Now she speaks of me so kindly, but you know, I was pretty much. I feel like I was a typical person who was directly impacted by somebody who was going through substance use disorder. So you know, when everything happened, really we had purchased a house in less than a year before together, and all of a sudden I was parenting a teenager and trying to figure out, you know, paying the mortgage and how was this all going to work. And you know, something about when people are in jail, they don't know when they're going to get out. So none of us really knew. I mean, in the end, I think that there was just one day she showed up at work and said, "Hey, I got out of jail." And it's like, woo.
That was the best day of my life.
It was, but you know, I really can say honestly that at that time, I didn't see how I would ever be able to trust her again, because all I could see was, you know, the products, I guess, of what addiction does to a person, and I thought that we couldn't possibly repair that relationship. But I can tell you honestly today that I appreciate her so much, and I remember writing her a letter once telling her how much I loved how she's perfectly imperfect, and that's just the way she's supposed to be. So yeah, I am so incredibly impressed, and so when I feel funny saying I'm proud of someone, because it's almost like then I take some of that responsibility, but I am so it's like, wow, she's just so amazing. She's done so much. And somehow, because of what she's gone through, it counts for even more. You know, I don't know why that is, but it is true. She's just such a blessing to this world.
Ditto. Honestly, I mean, I never would have. I mean, you held my kids together, you held the house together, you held all that stuff together. And I'm sure you weren't happy about it, but you still let me come home.
Yes, I did.
So, I mean, it takes a village, right? I don't do this by myself. I think you should come on the road with me, Meg.
Okay. I would love to.
Virtually, anyway.
Yeah, yes, and that would be better and easier. Well, I hate to say it, but it's 8:06, so I think we have to let all these sisters go to sleep. I'm just kidding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here.
Thanks so
Good
much.
to see you, Davey. Bye. Love you, Meg.
Best.
Thank you.
Kristen.
Thank you. Take care. Enjoy your art, Davey.
Oh, it's fabulous. We have fun.